My daughter-in-law mocked my cooking, but those meals fed her when life humbled her. I can still hear her laughter, sharp and bright like breaking glass, echoing through my small kitchen that autumn afternoon. She stood there in her designer heels, looking at my vegetable soup as if it were something scraped from the bottom of a forgotten pot. "You actually eat this?" she said, wrinkling her perfect nose. I stirred the broth slowly, saying nothing, but inside, something quiet and knowing settled in my chest. Because I've lived long enough to understand this truth. The meals we mock in comfort are often the ones we beg for in desperation. Life has a way of bringing us full circle, child. And sometimes, that circle tastes like humble pie served in a bowl you once refused. Welcome, my dear. This is Grandma Alice Stories, where every tale carries a lesson and every wound carries wisdom. Pull up a chair, pour yourself some tea, and settle in close. What I'm about to share isn't just a story, it's a testimony of how pride falls, how love endures, and how the simplest things we take for granted become our greatest treasures when everything else crumbles away. My kitchen has always been the heart of my home. Not because it's fancy, Lord knows it isn't. The countertops are chipped Formica from 1987, the cabinets creak when you open them, and the linoleum floor has seen better decades. But these four walls have witnessed every season of my life. This is where I canned peaches with my mother, where I taught my son to crack eggs without getting shells in the bowl, where my husband kissed my forehead every morning before work for 37 years until the day he didn't wake up. This kitchen raised my boy on love and leftovers, on soups stretched to feed one more mouth, on casseroles made from whatever the pantry offered. We weren't rich, but we were never hungry. Not in body, and certainly not in spirit. My son Thomas, my Tommy, he understood that. He grew up knowing the value of a home-cooked meal, the comfort of something warm waiting when the world turned cold. He'd always said that no restaurant could match his mama's cooking, that even my simplest dishes tasted like home. Then he met Claire. She swept into his life like a magazine spread come to life, all glossy hair, perfect makeup, and clothes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She worked in marketing for some tech company downtown, drove a car that purred instead of rattled, and lived in a world I barely recognized. But Tommy loved her, and when your child loves someone, you open your heart and hope for the best. I tried. God knows I tried. The first time I invited them for dinner after their engagement, I made my signature pot roast, the one that had won me praise at church potlucks for 20 years, the one Tommy used to ask for on his birthday. I set the table with my good dishes, lit a candle, even put out cloth napkins. I wanted Claire to feel welcomed, to see that while we might not have much, what we had was offered with open arms. She arrived wearing white, pristine, expensive white, and eyed my dining room like she was touring a museum of poverty. Tommy kissed my cheek and told me everything smelled amazing, but I noticed how he watched Claire, gauging her reaction, seeking her approval. We sat down to eat, and I served the pot roast with roasted carrots and mashed potatoes, simple, honest food made with care. Tommy dug in immediately, groaning with appreciation the way he always did. But Claire picked at her plate like she was performing surgery, separating the meat from the vegetables with surgical precision. "Is something wrong, dear?" I asked gently. She looked up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh no, it's just, I'm watching my carbs. And we usually eat out at places with, lighter options. More contemporary cuisine." Contemporary cuisine. In my 20 years of cooking, I'd never heard pot roast called outdated. Tommy jumped in quickly. "Mom's cooking is classic comfort food, Claire. This is what I grew up on." She said, taking the smallest bite possible. "How quaint." Quaint. That word hung in the air like smoke. But I smiled, because that's what you do when you're trying to build bridges. "Well, I hope you'll still enjoy it. There's apple pie for dessert." "Store-bought?" she asked. "Homemade," I said quietly. She didn't have any. Over the following months, a pattern emerged. Tommy would bring Claire by, and she'd find reasons to avoid my cooking. She'd eaten earlier. She was on a cleanse. She'd just discovered she might be allergic to something I'd used. Each excuse was delivered with a pleasant smile and an undertone of superiority that made my kitchen feel smaller, my efforts more foolish. But the worst came that Sunday in October, the day I'm telling you about now. I'd invited them for lunch after church. Tommy had been working long hours at the construction company, looking tired, and I worried he wasn't eating properly. So I made a big pot of my vegetable beef soup, the kind that simmers all morning, filling the house with warmth and the promise of nourishment. They arrived late. Claire was on her phone, laughing at something, still tapping away as she walked into my kitchen. She barely glanced at me, but when she saw the pot on the stove, she actually stopped mid-text. "What is that?" she asked, her nose wrinkling. "Vegetable soup," I said, ladling it into bowls. "I made extra so you can take some home." That's when she laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine laugh of disbelief. "Mother Alice, you can't be serious. Tommy, you actually grew up eating this peasant food." Peasant food. The ladle trembled slightly in my hand, but I kept pouring. Tommy's face flushed. "Claire. No, I mean, I understand you didn't have much growing up, but now? In 2024? You can order actual chef-prepared meals delivered to your door. You don't have to eat like it's the Depression." She pulled out her phone again. "Here, let me show you this meal kit service we use. The recipes are designed by actual culinary school graduates. Much more sophisticated than this." She waved her hand dismissively at my soup, at my kitchen, at everything I'd poured my heart into for 40 years. I set down the ladle and looked at my son. He stood there, caught between two worlds, saying nothing. And in that silence, something inside me cracked. Not broke, but cracked, like ice before the thaw. "I see," I said softly. "Well, Claire, you're certainly welcome to order whatever you'd like. But this soup fed Tommy through college. It fed him through sick days and heartbreaks and late-night study sessions. It may be simple, but it's made with love, and that's a recipe you can't download." Claire's smile turned sharp. "Love doesn't add nutritional value, Mother Alice. But it's sweet that you think it does." She turned to Tommy. "Come on, bud. Let's grab sushi on the way home." And he went. My son, my Tommy, looked at the soup steaming in bowls on my table, looked at me standing alone in my small kitchen, and he chose to walk out that door. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat down at my table and ate my soup, bowl after bowl, until the pot was nearly empty. That night, I washed the dishes slowly, methodically, watching the autumn rain streak down my kitchen window. Somewhere across town, my son was eating raw fish with a woman who'd called my life's work peasant food. And I wondered, not for the first time, if love could survive being mocked. If a mother's heart could keep breaking and still keep beating. I didn't know then that within 6 months, Claire would be standing at this same kitchen door, desperate and humbled, begging for the very thing she'd scorned. But that chapter was still unwritten. All I knew that rainy October night was this. My soup pot sat empty on the stove, and my son's chair sat empty at my table. And sometimes, child, emptiness has a way of making room for the lessons we need most to learn. The weeks after that Sunday moved like cold molasses, slow, thick, and leaving a bitter taste. I didn't hear from Tommy for 12 days. 12 days of silence where there used to be phone calls, where there used to be Sunday visits, where there used to be a son who knew his mama's number by heart. When he finally called, his voice sounded different. Strained. Like he was reading from a script Claire had written. "Hey, sorry I haven't been by. Work's been crazy, and Claire's been planning this big dinner party for her colleagues, and you know how it is." But I didn't know. Because the Tommy I raised wouldn't have let 2 weeks pass without checking on his mother. The Tommy I raised wouldn't have walked out on a meal made with love because someone else found it beneath them. "I understand, baby," I said anyway, because that's what mothers do. We understand even when our hearts are breaking. "You're always welcome here. The door's always open." "I know, Ma. I know." But he didn't come by. Not that week. Not the next. November rolled in with gray skies and an emptiness that settled into my bones. I kept cooking, of course. Old habits don't die just because the table stays empty. But something had shifted in my small world. My kitchen felt bigger somehow, lonelier, like it was waiting for voices that might never return. I'd see Tommy occasionally at the grocery store or passing through town in that fancy car of Claire's. He'd wave, promised to stop by soon, but soon kept getting pushed further away. And I'd watch him drive off, noticing how his shoulders seemed heavier, how his smile seemed thinner. My neighbor, Dorothy, noticed too. She'd been my friend since before Tommy was born, the kind of friend who didn't need explanations to understand. "That girl's got him wrapped around her little finger," Dorothy said one afternoon over coffee at my kitchen table. "I saw them at that new French restaurant downtown last week. She was snapping her fingers at the waiter like he was hired help. And your Tommy just sat there, looking uncomfortable in a suit that probably cost more than my car payment." I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl and disappear. "He loves her, Dorothy. What can I do?" "You can stop making excuses for her," Dorothy said, her voice sharp with protective anger. "She's changing him, Alice. Can't you see it? Your boy who used to help elderly ladies with their groceries is now too busy to visit his own mother." I could see it. Lord, I could see it clear as day. But what people don't tell you about watching your child change is that you're helpless to stop it. You can't protect them from their own choices, can't shield them from lessons they need to learn themselves. All you can do is wait. And pray. And keep the porch light on. December came with its usual demands: Christmas preparations, church bazaars, neighbors needing meals during sick spells. I stayed busy, kept my hands occupied even when my heart felt heavy. Then, 3 weeks before Christmas, Tommy called with an invitation that felt more like a summons. "Mom, Claire's hosting a holiday dinner party next Saturday. Kind of a formal thing, her boss and some colleagues. She wanted me to invite you." The pause that followed told me everything. She hadn't wanted to invite me at all. This was Tommy's doing, probably after some argument, some negotiation. "I don't know, honey. Formal parties aren't really my..." "Please, Mom." His voice cracked slightly. "I want you there. I need you to see how well we're doing. How good everything is. How good everything is." The words sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "All right, baby. I'll be there." The Saturday of the dinner party, I stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes, looking at dresses that suddenly seemed too old, too simple, too much like exactly who I was. Finally, I chose a navy dress I'd worn to my husband's retirement party years ago. It was clean, modest, appropriate. It would not be enough. I knew that before I even arrived. Tommy and Claire's apartment was everything my home wasn't: sleek, modern, full of furniture that looked uncomfortable and art that looked expensive. Chrome and glass everywhere, like living inside a jewelry box. Cold. Beautiful. Cold. Claire answered the door in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Her smile was performative, the kind you give to guests you're obligated to welcome. "Mother Alice. How lovely. Come in." The apartment was full of people I didn't know, holding wine glasses and laughing at jokes I didn't understand. Tommy appeared at my elbow, looking handsome but tired in a tailored suit. "You look nice, Mom," he whispered, kissing my cheek. "So do you, baby. Are you eating?" "Claire's got us on this Mediterranean diet thing. Lots of fish and quinoa." He said it like he was reciting a rule. "Quinoa," I repeated softly. "Does it fill you up?" He didn't answer. Dinner was served on plates so white they looked untouched by human hands. The portions were small, artistic arrangements of things I couldn't identify. Microgreens. Something called a deconstructed salad, which seemed like a fancy way of saying they forgot to toss it. I sat between a woman who worked in blockchain innovation and a man who disrupted the wellness space. They talked around me, through me, occasionally remembering I existed long enough to ask polite questions that didn't require real answers. "And what do you do, Alice?" the blockchain woman asked. "I'm retired. Used to work as a school cafeteria manager." "Oh." Her interest died instantly. "How nice." Across the table, I watched Claire holding court, laughing too loud, touching Tommy's arm possessively whenever another woman spoke to him. She was performing success, displaying it like those expensive plates, beautiful, impressive, and utterly empty of substance. Then came dessert. Or what Claire called dessert, a tiny square of something that tasted vaguely of chocolate and cost, according to her loud announcement, $40 per serving from an exclusive patisserie. Can you imagine? She said, looking directly at me. $40 for one dessert. But when you've worked hard and earned your place in life, you deserve to indulge in quality. Don't you think, Mother Alice? The table went quiet. Everyone understood what she was really saying. Asterisk, you could never afford this. You could never be this. You're here because I'm generous enough to allow it. Asterisk. I set down my fork carefully. I think, I said slowly, that I've had desserts that cost $3 and tasted like love. And I've had desserts that cost $40 and tasted like loneliness dressed up fancy. Price doesn't always reflect value, dear. Claire's smile froze. Tommy's eyes widened. Well, Claire said, her voice sharp as cut glass, I suppose that's the difference between us. I know quality when I taste it. I don't settle for less. No, I agreed softly. You certainly don't settle. The question is, does not settling make you happy? Or just make you tired from reaching? The party ended shortly after. Claire barely spoke to me as I gathered my coat. Tommy walked me to my car, his hands shoved deep in his expensive pockets. Mom, I'm sorry. She didn't mean. Yes, she did, baby. And that's all right. People show you who they are. It's up to you whether you believe them. She's under a lot of pressure at work. And planning this party was stressful. I cupped his face in my hands, the way I used to when he was small and scared. Tommy, my love, when did you start making yourself smaller to fit into someone else's life? He pulled away, but not before I saw tears threatening in his eyes. I should get back inside. Thanks for coming, Mom. I drove home through December darkness, past houses lit with Christmas lights and the warmth of families gathered together. My house would be dark when I arrived, empty except for memories and the lingering smell of meals no one came to eat anymore. But as I pulled into my driveway, my phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy, "Come over tomorrow. Something you need to see." About Tommy's job. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Because somehow, deep in my bones, I knew the life Claire had been building on designer labels and $40 desserts was about to come crashing down. And when it did, my kitchen would be waiting. Dorothy's kitchen smelled like cinnamon rolls when I arrived the next morning, but her face told me this wasn't a social visit. She poured coffee with shaking hands and slid a newspaper across the table. The local business section, folded to an article that made my blood run cold. Local construction firm faces major layoffs after project cancellation. Tommy's company, the one he'd worked at for 8 years, climbing from laborer to foreman. The job that paid for that fancy apartment, that expensive lifestyle, that world Claire had built on a foundation that was apparently crumbling. Posted yesterday, Dorothy said quietly. My nephew works there too. Says they're letting go 40% of the workforce by New Year. Seniority doesn't matter, it's pure numbers now. I stared at the article, my coffee going cold in my hands. Does Tommy know? If he doesn't yet, he will by Monday. Alice. Dorothy reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I know you're hurt. I know they've treated you terribly. But that boy is going to need you. I know, I whispered. I know. Monday came and went. Then Tuesday. No call from Tommy. Wednesday afternoon, I was putting up the last of my Christmas decorations, simple, handmade ornaments that had witnessed decades of holidays, when my phone finally rang. Mom. His voice was hollow, scraped raw. Can I come over? Of course, baby. Always. 20 minutes later, he sat at my kitchen table, the same table Claire had mocked, in the same chair he'd abandoned, and told me everything. The layoffs. The severance package that would barely cover 2 months of expenses. The savings they'd burned through maintaining a lifestyle they couldn't actually afford. The credit cards maxed out on furniture and clothes and dinners at restaurants with names I couldn't pronounce. We're broke, not struggling, broke. And Claire. He put his head in his hands. She doesn't know yet. She's at some spa retreat this week that we put on a credit card. I don't know how to tell her that when she gets back, everything's gone. I got up and started making soup. Not because I had words of wisdom, but because it's what I knew how to do. Chicken stock, vegetables, the rhythmic motion of chopping that soothed my anxious hands for 40 years. How long can you keep the apartment? I asked gently. Maybe through January if I can pick up side work. But after that. He watched me cook, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in months. Hunger. Not for food, but for something real, something that didn't require performing or pretending. You know you can always come home, right? This house may not be fancy, but... I know, Ma. I know. He paused. I'm sorry. For everything. For letting her talk about you that way. For choosing. Hush now. I set a bowl of soup in front of him. Simple vegetable soup, the peasant food his wife had mocked. You don't apologize for loving someone. You just learn from it. He picked up the spoon, and I watched my grown son cry into his soup as he ate like he hadn't had a real meal in months. Maybe he hadn't. Claire came home from her spa retreat on Friday, glowing with treatments and oblivious to the disaster waiting. Tommy told me later what happened when he broke the news. The screaming, the accusations, the way she'd looked at him like he'd personally betrayed her by losing a job in a mass layoff. This is temporary, she'd insisted. You'll find something better. Something that pays more. I'm not living like me, I thought when he told me. She's not willing to live like me. But life doesn't care what we're willing to do. It has a way of teaching us lessons whether we're ready or not. December crawled toward Christmas, and I didn't hear from Tommy again. I decorated my small tree, wrapped presents I wasn't sure would be opened, and tried not to imagine my son and his wife drowning in the life they'd built on credit and pride. Then, on Christmas Eve morning, someone knocked on my door. Not the confident knock of Claire's manicured hands, but a desperate, frightened pounding. I opened the door to find her standing on my porch in clothes I'd never seen her wear. Jeans, a plain sweater, no makeup, hair unwashed. She looked small. Mortal. Human. Mother Alice. Her voice broke. I don't know what to do. I stepped aside and let her in. She stood in my living room, this woman who'd mocked my home, my cooking, my entire existence, and she looked around like she was seeing it for the first time. The worn furniture. The handmade decorations. The simplicity she'd scorned. Tommy's out trying to find work, she said, her words tumbling out fast and desperate. Any work. But it's Christmas Eve and everything's closed and we haven't eaten since yesterday because we're trying to make the last $50 stretch until... She broke down completely, collapsing onto my couch in sobs that shook her entire body. I didn't say, I told you so. I didn't lecture or scold or remind her of every cruel word she'd spoken in my kitchen. I just went to my stove and started cooking. An hour later, Claire sat at my kitchen table with a bowl of the same vegetable soup she'd called peasant food. Her hands trembled as she lifted the spoon to her lips. She took one sip. Then another. Then she started crying again, but different this time, not the hysterical sobs of panic, but something deeper, something that sounded like surrender. It's good, she whispered. It's so good. How is it so good? Because it's made with love, I said simply. That's the ingredient you can't order online or buy at fancy stores. Love and time and the knowledge that sometimes the simplest things sustain us when everything else falls apart. She ate 3 bowls. I watched this woman who'd ordered $40 desserts devour my simple soup like it was the finest meal she'd ever tasted. And maybe in that moment, it was. Because hunger, real hunger, the kind that comes from pride stripped away and options exhausted, has a way of making us taste what really matters. When Tommy arrived an hour later, he stopped in the doorway, stunned to find his wife at my table, eating my food, crying into a bowl she'd once refused. Mom, He looked between us, lost. Sit down, baby, I said. There's plenty. We ate together that Christmas Eve, the 3 of us in my small kitchen, sharing soup and bread and the kind of silence that comes when words aren't enough. Claire kept her eyes down, shame and gratitude warring on her face. Tommy held my hand across the table, squeezing it like he used to as a little boy when he was scared. You can stay here, I said finally, until you get back on your feet. The guest room's ready. It's not fancy, but... It's home, Tommy finished, his voice thick. It's home, Mom. Claire looked up at me, her mascara-streaked face full of something I'd never seen there before, humility. Why? She asked. After everything I said, everything I did, why would you help us? I smiled, reaching across to pat her hand. Because that's what family does, dear. We feed each other. Even when we've been hurt. Especially then. The table's always set, the door's always open, and there's always enough soup to go around. She started crying again, but this time when she reached for my hand, I took it. That night, after they'd moved a few essential bags into my guest room, after we'd shared cookies and tea, after Claire had apologized 17 different ways, I sat alone in my kitchen thinking about pride and humility, about plenty and poverty, about how life has a way of bringing us full circle. Claire had mocked my simple meals, my humble home, my old-fashioned ways. But when her tower of pride came crashing down, when her designer life crumbled to dust, she came back to the same table she'd scorned. She ate from the same pot she'd laughed at. She found refuge in the very place she'd called beneath her. And isn't that just like life? We spend so much time chasing what looks impressive that we forget what sustains us. We mock the simple things until we're desperate enough to need them. We don't recognize homes until we're homeless. We don't taste love until we're starving for it. My kitchen may not be fancy. My meals may not cost $40. But they're real. They're honest. They're made with hands that have weathered storms and hearts that have learned to forgive. And sometimes, child, that's the most expensive thing in the world. Listen closely now, because this is what I need you to understand. The meals you mock in comfort will be the ones you crave in crisis. The hands you push away in pride will be the ones you reach for in desperation. And the love you take for granted will be the only thing left standing when everything else crumbles. Never mock the simple things. Never scorn the humble heart. Because life has a way of serving us exactly what we need, and it usually comes in a bowl we once refused. The spoon you reject today might be the one that saves you tomorrow. And that, my dear, is a lesson worth more than any $40 dessert. Thank you for sitting with me through this story, dear one. If it touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone in your own life, or if it taught you something about pride and humility, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Grandma Alice Stories for more lessons from a life well lived. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a tale of wisdom, redemption, and the truth that what goes around always comes around. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been judged for living simply? Or have you witnessed someone's pride come before their fall? Share your story. This is a safe place for truth and healing. And remember, the table is always set. The door is always open. And there's always enough love to go around. Until next time, keep your heart humble and your soup pot full. With love and wisdom, Grandma Alice. The greatest meals aren't measured by their price, but by the love that stirs the pot and the hands that serve them freely.